Welcome to another episode of Talking Politics here at The Hindu with me, Nistula Hebbar, where we unpack the news making headlines in domestic politics. This week, just hot off the presses, is the news that the Congress party will be projecting its sitting Chief Minister Charanjit Singh Channi as its Chief Ministerial face going into the Punjab elections of 2022. Now, some may argue that the announcement was kind of redundant because the Chief Minister is in his chair and the election, he becomes automatically the face for the party during the elections. But the troubles in Punjab Congress have made such an assumption difficult to make, and it was Congress leader Rahul Gandhi who made this announcement formally at a public rally in the presence of State Unit Chief Rajashree Singh Sidhu, who is considered the other main claimant for this position, and to make matters entirely clear to the rest of the party and the voting public of Punjab. Just why was this decision required? What was it that happened in Punjab in the last few months, in the 111 days of Mr. Channi's tenure, that made this decision inevitable and necessary? This will be the subject of this week's Talking Politics. The projection of a chief ministerial candidate before going in for assembly polls in any state for the Congress is a rare event, and therefore this particular announcement that Mr. Channi would be the chief ministerial face for the Congress in Punjab requires some explanation. What is it that happened in the 111 days that Mr. Channi was at the helm of affairs in Punjab as chief minister that made this announcement inevitable and was pushed through without much consideration of what resistance might be put up by Mr. Sidhu? In the end, Mr. Sidhu went quietly at this public rally and he promised Congress leader Rahul Gandhi that he would cooperate with anybody that the party decided to project. On the surface, it looks that all is well and that Mr. Channi would be going in with a united team, etc. But there is much activity below the surface, and it has everything to do with what happened in the run-up to this announcement. Now, where do we make a start in terms of explaining this thing? I have already said that announcement of this sort is quite unusual for any state by the Congress party. Usually these things are left to the High Command once the party is elected to power and a legislative party meets. Most of the time, the legislature party that meets after the polls, basically empowers the Congress High Command to take the decision on who would be their leader. Except, of course, when it happened in 2013 in Karnataka, where after a very, very long time, there was an actual vote, a secret franchise of MLAs, and Mr. Sidhu was elected through this process to be Chief Minister. Well, that was Karnataka, but in Punjab, there were a specific set of incidents that led to this pass. What were these? Well, as you know, towards the end of last year, Captain Amrinder Singh, facing a lot of pressure from his own party men and pushed off by Mr. Navjot Singh Sidhu, who was party chief and enjoyed the support of the High Command in terms of making issues with the party's chief minister in that state, finally decided to quit. He said he felt humiliated that Mr. Sidhu was not being reined in, whereas the state unit had told the High Command that Mr. Amrinder Singh was inaccessible, depended on a coterie of officials, etc. He was inaccessible to his own people, and there was a high degree of anti-incumbency that was being built up against Mr. Amrinder Singh, that if he wasn't removed, then the party would lose the state for sure, that they needed a change. They needed to change horses midstream, not even midstream, at the end of the stream, if they had any hope of making any headway in the assembly elections. Well, Mr. Amrinder Singh then quit the party and has formed his own party called the Punjab Loktaantrik Congress. He has signed up with the BJP and this Akali Dal Sangyukt, led by Mr. Dhinsa. They are an alliance and they are going into polls together. That leaves the Congress. One would have thought that if Mr. Sidhu was leading the revolt against Captain Amrinder Singh with the support of the majority of the MLAs, that he would be the Chief Ministerial candidate. But the Congress High Command thought otherwise. They wanted somebody who would listen to the High Command, who would give a particular message, a particular political message, and was also inoffensive and acceptable to all. Enter Mr. Channi. Mr. Channi, he belongs to the Dalit community. Punjab has one of the largest populations of Dalit communities in India. 32% of the electorate is Dalit. And the appointment of Mr. Channi as Chief Minister of Punjab, it was felt, would help the party woo this section of population to their favor. Mr. Channi was handpicked by Mr. Rahul Gandhi and was put in place, much to the chagrin of Mr. Sidhu, who did create a lot of noise after that. Now, this is where things get interesting. So Mr. Sidhu was party chief, Mr. Channi is chief minister, Mr. Sidhu was eyeing that chair and he was picked to the post by Mr. Channi. Mr. Channi came in from behind. He was not somebody who was very high profile and he belonged to a marginalized community. So Mr. Sidhu threw his weight around. He threatened to quit as PCC chief, and in fact he did announce all this on social media. When it came to administrative issues also, he gave a lot of grief to Mr. Channi. He created a lot of ruckus over the DGP, the appointment of the DGP in Punjab, as a result of which Mr. Siddharth Chattopadhyay replaced Iqbal Preet Singh Sahota as DGP, as was required by Mr. Sidhu. He also created a lot of ruckus over the appointment of the Advocate General APS Deol, who he said had appeared for the accused in the sacrilege incident and subsequent police firing in Kokatpura and Behbal Kala in 2015. So all this was not acceptable to him, and he made a very public sort of noise about these issues. He felt extremely aggrieved that the party for whom he had done so much, he had spearheaded the rebellion against Captain Amrinder Singh, who was no pushover, but was overlooked for becoming chief minister. Mr. Channi, on his part, of course, did not only rely on the fact that he was from the Dalit community and that just naming him would be a symbolic sort of gesture to the community. He did a lot of popular things. He gave kids rides in his helicopters. He talked a good game. He stopped on his tours and fixed electricity cables and generally behaved like the man of the people. He created enough noise in his 111-day tenure till date that he started to emerge as a very, very viable alternative in terms of leadership. The party high command felt that he was popular enough that he should be projected this way. What was finally very, very important was that if this had not been done, the community to which the Congress was hoping to appeal to, not just in Punjab, but across the country in terms of a social justice intervention, which was to project a Dalit chief minister. Please remember that former President Gyani Zail Singh was the last non-Jat Sikh chief minister of Punjab, and since then they have always been only Jat Sikhs. So this was a big, big gesture towards the community. If Mr. Channi had not been projected further, if Mr. Sidhu would have had his way in terms of just jettisoning his role, then a wrong message, everything that had been done till now would have come a cropper. So it was decided by the party high command, by the Congress's party high command, that it was high time that Mr. Channi would be announced as the chief ministerial face. Now, what about the Jat Sikh community? As I said, Punjab has been having continuously, I think since 1979, Jat Sikh chief ministers. Now, what about that community which is used to governing, which is used to being in a dominant position? They occupy around 20% of the vote in Punjab. But the Congress reasoned that much of this vote would get divided between Captain Amrinder Singh, the Akali Dal, the Aam Aadmi Party and themselves, and that they would have a better chance if they took their bit of the Jat Sikh vote, the Jat Sikh support that would accrue to the Congress traditionally, and amalgamate it with a larger share of the Dalit vote. There is some sort of political arithmetic behind this move as well. Will this move alienate Jat Sikhs? Well, that is, of course, yet to be seen. As of now, Punjab looks like a nice four-cornered fight with very clear faces representing each of these four corners. You have Mr. Channi for the Congress. You have Bhagwant Mann from the Aam Aadmi Party. The Aam Aadmi Party also broke off its shyness and announced Chief Ministerial face there. You have Sukhbir Badal from the Akali Dal, and you have Captain Amrinder Singh from the NDA stable. So this is what Punjab looks like right now. Will the Congress's gamble on Mr. Channi pay off? That will only be known in March. Thank you so much for watching. This is all I have this week.